Texas, February 1946. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison conducted routine belongings inventory for German women. Post scheduled for repatriation from Camp Swift. In the footlocker of Elizabeth Hartman, a former telegraph operator from Hamburg, Morrison found a leather-bound journal wrapped in cloth and tied with string. The cover bore 2 words in German: "Nicht öffnen, do not open." Morrison opened it anyway, per security protocols. The first entry, dated June 1945, read, "They told us Americans were monsters who would starve and mistreat us. Today they served us fried chicken and asked if we needed anything. I must document this before I forget, before I start believing the lies again." Lieutenant Sarah Morrison had been conducting repatriation inventories for 3 weeks, processing the belongings of 200 German women POW preparing to return home. The work was tedious but necessary, documenting possessions, checking for contraband, ensuring nothing prohibited was being transported back to occupied Germany. Most footlockers contained predictable items: clothing, toiletries, letters from family, small crafts made during captivity. Occasionally, Morrison found hidden items: extra food, camp script that should have been returned, once a small knife fashioned from scrap metal. These discoveries required reports, sometimes disciplinary action, always additional paperwork. Elizabeth Hartman's footlocker appeared unremarkable initially. Standard clothing, a pair of worn boots, letters tied with ribbon, a small photograph of a man in German military uniform, husband or brother, Morrison assumed. And at the bottom, wrapped carefully in a pillowcase and tied with string, a leather journal. The exterior bore no markings except 2 German words carved into the leather: "Nicht öffnen," do not open. Morrison's German was functional, good enough for basic communication with prisoners. She understood the instruction, but was obligated to ignore it. Security protocols required examining all written materials for intelligence value or security concerns. She unwrapped the journal, opened to the first page, and began reading. The handwriting was precise, the German formal and educated. The first entry was dated June 15, 1945. They told us Americans were monsters who would starve and mistreat us. Today they served us fried chicken and asked if we needed anything. I must document this before I forget, before I start believing the lies again. I am writing this diary against orders and better judgment. If found, it could be confiscated or used against me. But I need to record what I witness here, because everything contradicts what we were taught. Either the propaganda lied, or this treatment is elaborate deception. I must track which is true. My name is Elizabeth Hartman. I am 28 years old, from Hamburg, former telegraph operator with German communications office near Bremen. Captured by British forces April 1945, transferred to American custody May 1945, transported to Texas June 1945. I expected cruelty. I found fried chicken. The cognitive dissonance is overwhelming. Morrison stopped reading. This wasn't intelligence material or security threat. This was personal testimony, a woman's attempt to process the gap between propaganda and reality. She should have logged it as personal effects and moved on. Instead, she kept reading. After reading 10 pages, Morrison made a decision. She walked to the camp commander's office, knocked, and entered when Major Richard Chun called for her to come in. "Sir," Morrison said, "I found something during repatriation inventory. Not contraband exactly. A diary, written by one of the German women. I think you need to see it." Chun looked up from paperwork, mildly annoyed. "Lieutenant, unless it contains intelligence value or security threats, just log it and continue processing." Morrison placed the journal on his desk. "It documents her entire time here, sir. 8 months of observations about American treatment, the food, the work conditions, everything. It's a complete record of how propaganda dissolves when confronted with reality." Chun opened the diary, read the first entry, then the second, then several more. His expression shifted from mild annoyance to focused interest. "This needs to be preserved," he said finally. "Not as contraband, as historical documentation. Call Major General Patterson's office. Tell them we have primary source material documenting prisoner experience and propaganda dissolution. They'll want to see this." Morrison felt vindicated. She had been right to recognize the diary's significance. This wasn't just one woman's journal. It was testimony to the power of direct experience over indoctrination. Elizabeth Hartman had been raised in Hamburg, educated at good schools, trained as a telegraph operator when clerical work became respectable for middle-class women. She married at 23, a schoolteacher named Peter, who was conscripted in 1942 and sent east. She received no letters after January 1943 and assumed the worst. She worked throughout the war, operating telegraph equipment in a communications office near Bremen, relaying messages she didn't fully understand but assumed were important. As Allied forces advanced in 1945, her office was evacuated, then overrun by British troops during the chaotic final weeks. The British processed her as civilian auxiliary, not quite military, but affiliated with military communications. They held her at a temporary camp, fed her adequately, treated her fairly if impersonally. In May, she was transferred to American custody, along with 30 other German women, for transport to the United States. A propaganda she had absorbed over 12 years told her this was disaster. Americans were cruel. They would work prisoners to death. They would mistreat women. The journey across the Atlantic was filled with terror about what awaited at the other end. Then she arrived at Camp Swift in June 1945, and everything she expected turned out to be wrong. Morrison and Chun read through the diary together, Chun translating passages that Morrison's German couldn't handle. The early entries documented Elizabeth's first days at Camp Swift, June 16, 1945, second day. Breakfast was scrambled eggs, sausage, toast, coffee, real food, not ersatz. More than I ate in 6 months in Germany. The other women are as confused as I am. Is this standard? Is this temporary? Will they reveal true intentions later? June 18th, assigned to laundry work. 8-hour days. Adequate breaks. American supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, is stern but fair. She showed us proper techniques, provided adequate soap and equipment. No cruelty. No impossible quotas. Just ... work. June 20th. Today, a guard named Corporal Martinez brought cold water to the laundry because of heat. He said, in broken German, "Texas summer is hard. Stay hydrated." This small kindness undid something in me. I cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes. The entries continued chronologically, documenting every day of her captivity. Meals received, work performed, interactions with staff, small kindnesses that accumulated into larger understanding. Chun looked up from the diary. She's documenting the dissolution of propaganda through daily experience. This is exactly what we've been telling Washington happens, but haven't had good evidence for. There's more, Morrison said. Later entries get more analytical. She starts comparing American treatment to German conditions, questioning everything she believed. By July, Elizabeth's entries had evolved from simple documentation to analysis. July 12th. I have been thinking about why American treatment shocks me. Not because it's unusually good, it's just adequate. 3 meals, reasonable work, medical care when needed. Basic decency. The shock is realizing that basic decency feels extraordinary because I became accustomed to its absence. July 15th. Today we received mail from home. My sister writes that Hamburg is rubble and food is scarce. She is grateful I am somewhere safe. The irony overwhelms me. I am a prisoner in an enemy country, yet I am safer and better fed than free Germans at home. How did we reach this point? July 20th. Frau Schmidt said today, "They feed us this well to make us weak, to make us forget our duty. But I think the opposite is true. They feed us well because they can, because their system works differently, because abundance changes what's possible. Our weakness wasn't food. It was being taught to accept suffering as virtue. Morrison pointed to this entry. Here, this is where she's not just documenting, but understanding. Recognizing that the propaganda didn't just lie about Americans. It taught Germans to accept unnecessary hardship. Sean nodded slowly. This is powerful testimony. Keep reading. The August entries documented Elizabeth's growing confidence in her observations. August 3rd. We are permitted to use the camp library. Books in German, donated by German American communities. I found Gerda, which I haven't read in years. The American librarian, Mrs. Chun, helped me find it. She asked if I enjoyed reading, recommended other books. She treated me like a person, not a prisoner. August 10th. Sunday recreation includes volleyball games. American guards play against prisoners sometimes. Today, Corporal Martinez's team played against ours. We won. He congratulated us genuinely. Competition without hostility. Sport without ideology. I had forgotten such things were possible. August 17th. There is a woman here, Margot, who still believes the propaganda. She insists American kindness is manipulation, that they'll reveal their true cruelty eventually. I used to think like her. Now I see she's protecting herself from a harder truth, that we were lied to systematically, that our suffering was policy, not necessity, that the enemy was more humane than our own leadership. Chun closed the diary momentarily. She's not just recording her own transformation. She's analyzing other prisoners' responses, documenting the psychology of propaganda resistance. It gets more detailed, Morrison said. September entries cover the education programs. September 5th, camp started offering English classes. I enrolled, thinking language skills might help after repatriation. The teacher, Mrs. Harrison, is volunteer from nearby town. She drives here twice weekly to teach enemy prisoners English. When I asked why, she said, because education builds peace. The simplicity of this philosophy startles me. September 12th. In English class, Mrs. Harrison explained American government structure, elected representatives, constitutional limits, civilian control of military. The idea that government serves citizens rather than citizens serving government seems almost fantastical. Yet this is the system that fed us adequately, worked us reasonably, treated us fairly. Perhaps the causation runs deeper than I understood. September 20th. I have been reading American newspapers in translation. They report German conditions honestly: destruction, starvation, occupation challenges. They do not gloat. They do not celebrate suffering. The tone is problem-solving. How to feed civilians, how to rebuild infrastructure, how to prevent disease. This pragmatic approach to defeated enemies seems very American. Morrison had marked several passages with paper slips. These entries, she said, show her connecting systematic treatment to systematic philosophy. She's recognizing that fair treatment isn't random kindness, but structural feature. October 3rd. Today is my 30th week here. I calculate that I have received approximately 630 meals, worked approximately 1,400 hours, and witnessed 0 acts of cruelty. The propaganda promised daily degradation. Instead, I experienced daily routine, boring, structured, but humane. October 10th. A question I cannot answer. Was it better to be free in Germany during the war years, or prisoner in America? Free meant constant fear, inadequate food, losing everything to bombs. Prisoner means safety, adequate food, boring routine. The question reveals how broken freedom became under the regime. October 15th. Today we learned the war officially ended, treaties signed. The question now is, when do we go home? And what home are we returning to? Hamburg is destroyed. Peter is probably dead. My job no longer exists. I will return to ruins and try to build something from them. But I will return knowing that what we were taught about the world was comprehensively wrong. That knowledge changes everything. Chun looked at Morrison. She's preparing herself for repatriation, knowing that this understanding will make her an outsider in defeated Germany. The final entries get even more profound, Morrison said. November 1st. We have been told repatriation will begin in December or January. I feel strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief to see family. Dread about explaining these 8 months. How do I tell them I was fed and treated well while they starved? That the enemy was kinder than our own government? That everything we believed was lies? November 8th. Today, Margot finally admitted she was wrong. She said, I wanted to believe Americans were cruel because that would make our suffering meaningful. If they're not cruel, then we suffered for nothing. This is the truth many cannot face, that our suffering had no nobility, no purpose, no justification. We simply suffered because systems chose suffering over welfare. November 15th. I have been thinking about what to tell people when I return. The truth seems both essential and impossible. Essential because lies brought us here. Impossible because truth makes everything worse before it can make anything better. But I will tell the truth anyway. I will show them this diary if I must. Morrison watched Chun's face as he read these passages. The transformation documented in these pages from propaganda believer to truth teller was exactly what the military had hoped prisoner treatment would achieve. Not through coercion, but through consistent demonstration of alternative systems. December 1st. The camp celebrated Thanksgiving, last month American holiday, about gratitude and harvest. We were included, served turkey dinner, permitted to observe even though it's not our tradition. I have been thinking about this inclusion. They didn't have to include enemy prisoners in their holiday. They chose to. That choice matters. December 10th. Packing today. I am permitted to take this diary home. I wrapped it carefully, tied it with string, wrote Nicht Öffnen on the cover. Not because I'm ashamed of contents, but because I want control over who reads it and when. This diary is my evidence. Proof that what I witnessed was real, not later revision or false memory. December 15th. Final entry before repatriation. Tomorrow we board ships for Germany. I am frightened and grateful simultaneously. Frightened of destroyed homeland. Grateful for 8 months of safety and adequate food. But mostly I am determined to tell truth, to resist propaganda, to remember that systems matter more than ideology, that evidence matters more than assertion. I write Nicht Öffnen on this cover, not to hide truth, but to protect it. Because truth is dangerous when power wants lies believed. And I will need this diary, this evidence, when people do and believe what I tell them about American treatment and German propaganda. If you are reading this, someone ignored my instruction. I hope you are reading with understanding, not judgment. I hope you recognize that this diary documents not betrayal, but education. That discovering your enemy is human doesn't make you traitor. It makes you honest. I am going home now. To ruins and reconstruction and truth-telling. This diary goes with me. Chun closed the journal carefully. That's the last entry? Yes, sir, Morrison said. She stopped writing the day before repatriation was scheduled. Chun called Elizabeth Hartman to his office the following morning. She entered nervously, uncertain why the camp commander wanted to speak with her hours before scheduled departure. Frau Hartman, Chun said through an interpreter, we found your diary during belongings inspection. Elizabeth's face went pale. That was private, personal, not contraband. No, Chun agreed. Not contraband. Something much more valuable. It's historical testimony. Documentation of your transformation from propaganda believer to truth seeker. It's important. Elizabeth said nothing, waiting. Chun continued. You wrote Nicht Öffnen on the cover. You wanted control over who reads it. I understand that. But I need to ask, would you be willing to let us copy certain entries? For historical archives, for documentation of prisoner experience, for evidence about how propaganda works and how it can be countered. Why? Elizabeth asked carefully. Because your words prove what we've been trying to explain, John said. That fair treatment changes minds more effectively than any propaganda. That showing mercy to enemies isn't weakness. It's how you build peace. Your diary is evidence of that process. Elizabeth considered this. If I allow copying, I keep the original? You keep the original, Shun confirmed. We photograph pages for archives. You take your diary home as planned. And if I refuse? Then you refuse. It's your diary, your truth, your control. But I'm asking you to share it because I think it matters. Elizabeth thought about this for long minutes. Then, I will allow copying on one condition. That when copies are made public, they include my real name. Not anonymous German woman. Elizabeth Hartmann from Hamburg. Because if I'm going to tell truth about propaganda and treatment, I should own that truth with my identity. Agreed, John said. Your name, your truth, your ownership of the testimony. They spent the next 4 hours in the camp's administrative office. A photographer carefully documented each page of the diary. Elizabeth watched, ensuring no damage to the original, occasionally explaining context or translating unclear passages. When finished, Shun returned the diary to her. This documentation matters, Frau Hartmann. What you witnessed and recorded will help others understand how propaganda works and how it can be defeated. Not through counter-propaganda, but through consistent demonstration of alternative systems. I hope so, Elizabeth replied. I hope my words matter. Because going home and telling truth will be difficult. People who suffered won't want to hear that their enemy treated prisoners well. It undermines their grievances, makes their suffering seem more unnecessary. Tell them anyway, Sean advised. Truth is worth the discomfort it causes. Elizabeth boarded the transport ship the next morning, diary wrapped carefully in her belongings. She carried it across the Atlantic, through repatriation processing in Bremen, and eventually home to Hamburg's ruins. The diary survived. She kept it for the rest of her life, showed it to family and friends who questioned her stories about American treatment, used it as evidence when people accused her of being too sympathetic to former enemies. The copied pages entered military archives, were studied by psychologists researching propaganda and belief change, and eventually were published in historical collections about POW experiences. Elizabeth returned to Hamburg in January 1946. The city she found bore little resemblance to the Hamburg she'd left. Block after block of rubble, people living in basements and damaged buildings, food scarce, fuel scarcer, winter brutal. She found her sister living in 3 rooms of a partially collapsed building. Her sister wept when she saw her, then asked, "How did they treat you? The Americans?" Elizabeth showed her the diary. "Read it," she said. "All of it. Then you'll understand." Her sister read for hours, occasionally stopping to ask questions or express disbelief. When finished, she said, "You were better off as a prisoner than we were as free Germans." Yes, Elizabeth confirmed. That's the truth. Uncomfortable, but true. How do we live with that? By remembering it, Elizabeth replied. By never forgetting that propaganda made us accept suffering as normal. By building systems that choose welfare over war. Over the following years, Elizabeth became an inadvertent witness to the power of documented truth. When people questioned her stories about American treatment, she showed them her diary. When former regime supporters claimed American propaganda had brainwashed prisoners, she provided her own daily observations as counter-evidence. She didn't become famous. She didn't write books or give lectures. She simply lived in rebuilt Hamburg, worked as a clerk in the Reconstruction Administration, and occasionally showed her diary to people who needed to see that truth could be documented, preserved, and shared. In 1952, a historian researching POW experiences asked to interview her. She agreed, provided access to her diary, explained her motivations for writing it. "I wrote it because I needed evidence," she told the historian. "Evidence that what I was experiencing was real. Because I knew that when I returned home, people would doubt my stories." But diary entries, written daily, couldn't be dismissed as later revision or false memory. Did people believe you? The historian asked. "Some did," Elizabeth said. "Some didn't. Some couldn't afford to believe because it made their own suffering seem more unnecessary. But the diary exists regardless of belief. Truth documented remains true even when people reject it. The copied pages remained in military archives for decades, occasionally accessed by researchers studying propaganda, prisoner treatment, or belief change. In 1989, a collection of POW testimonies was published, including extensive excerpts from Elizabeth's diary. The book was modestly successful, used in university courses about World War II, propaganda studies, and peace building. Elizabeth's entries were frequently cited as example of how direct experience could counter even deeply entrenched beliefs. Elizabeth died in 1987 at 70. Her original diary passed to her niece, who eventually donated it to a German historical archive. The leather cover, still bearing the carved words Nicht öffnen, showed decades of handling but remained intact. The diary sits now in climate-controlled storage in Hamburg, available to researchers who request access. The prohibition Elizabeth carved into the leather, "Do not open," is honored in spirit, if not letter. The diary is opened, but carefully, respectfully, with recognition that it contains one woman's courageous documentation of truth when truth was dangerous. The diary of Elizabeth Hartmann matters not because it reveals secret intelligence or documents atrocities. It matters because it captures the ordinary process of propaganda, defeat, daily observations that accumulate into understanding, small kindnesses that dissolve systematic hatred, consistent fair treatment that makes assertions of enemy cruelty impossible to maintain. Lieutenant Morrison's decision to read past Nicht öffnen, to recognize the diary's significance, to bring it to her commander's attention, these choices ensured the testimony survived and was preserved. Major Chan's decision to photograph the pages, while respecting Elizabeth's ownership, created documentation without theft. And Elizabeth's decision to write the diary in the first place, to document her transformation despite risk, to insist on owning her truth with her name attached, this courage created evidence that transcended her individual experience. In a footlocker at Camp Swift in February 1946, a diary wrapped in cloth and marked Nicht öffnen contained truth too important to remain hidden. An American lieutenant opened it, recognized its value, and ensured it was preserved not as contraband, but as testimony. That diary proved what many suspected, but few could document: that propaganda dissolves when confronted with sustained contradiction, that fair treatment of enemies builds peace more effectively than cruelty, that one woman's daily observations matter as much as official reports. Elizabeth wrote Nicht öffnen not from shame, but from wisdom, knowing that truth is dangerous when power once lies believed, knowing that documented evidence survives even when memory fails, knowing that testimony matters most when it challenges comfortable narratives. Her diary endures. The words she wrote between June 1945 and December 1945 continue teaching anyone who reads them that propaganda works by preventing observation, that truth requires evidence, that systems which choose mercy over cruelty aren't weak but wise, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is write down what we witness, wrap it carefully, and carry it forward even when we write Nicht öffnen on the cover, knowing that someday someone will need to open it and read what truth looks like when documented daily with precision, honesty, and courage.